Coverage of NCBA's CattleCon 2024 is brought to you by Alltech. Working together for a planet of plenty. Find out more by going to alltech.com. Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, and we're at the CattleCon Convention 2024, here at the NCBA meeting in Orlando, Florida, and joined right now by the Executive Vice President with the Canadian Cattle Association, and is Dennis Laycraft. Hey, Dennis, how's it going?
You know, it's going really well. We've got a lot of really good friends down here, and we've already had our trilateral meeting, so there's a good contingency from Mexico as well, and I just was a witness, or at least appeared with the Office of Management and Budget on the voluntary product of USA rule. So we've already had a lot of work go into this meeting.
Good stuff that we definitely want to hit on here for sure. We did talk to Nathan Finney, chair of CCA, about that trilateral meeting. I'd love your perspective on coming down here this year. What were you trying to accomplish with the trilateral meeting? What message were you trying to get across to your colleagues in Mexico and the U.S.?
There's a few different things. We've been working very closely. Last year, the big theme was on the vaccine banks for FMD, and we got the announcement in Canada. This year, we agreed that we're going to work on this whole cultured protein and, make sure the definition actually reflects what it is, not some marketing description.
This is meat in a petri dish. Yeah, right?
Well, except we wouldn't call it meat in a petri dish.
Good correction, Dennis.
Cell protein in a petri dish. That's the whole issue. It is not meat.
Yeah.
It doesn't come from a living animal. Plus everything that's in it, they can't just say it's proprietary. Any processed product, you have to put the list of ingredients in it, and we're going to expect the same high standards that we're required to meet for these new entrants.
Yeah, see how confusing it is? I was confused. If I'm confused, just think how confused the consumer is.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, we want to make sure when people are actually looking to get a natural product, and we're very proud of our sustainability record in North America and our environmental record. I think people, given the right information, are always going to opt for the product that's grown under natural conditions. So.
You mentioned the being a witness in front of the OMB. Mm-hmm. This is all about the product of the USA and some of those changes around that label. Give us the status update. Where is this at, and what were some of the things that you said to the committee?
Yeah. Right now, it's at the Office of Management and Budget. That's sort of the last step. They review it. We have a similar process in Canada before it goes back to the agency, which in this case is USDA and FSIS. And so it's sort of the last step. Now, they can say you need to go back and do more. You didn't necessarily follow the administrative procedures that are required, which is one of the arguments we're making. They didn't put some of the options they had actually indicated just a year earlier into the discussion. For instance, slaughter conveying origin. Right now, they've got the most prescriptive, restrictive definition in the world with the born, raised, slaughtered, and processed to qualify for the U.S. product. And in an integrated North American market, that has all kinds of implications, including when we start exporting products, because you have to put product of Canada or product of USA on your product when you export it. So there's going to be different definitions if it's going for export than if it's going to be used domestically. How do packers manage something like that? So.
Is the big concerns segregation at the plant, or what are some of the consequences that you are making sure you get the message across?
Yeah, and, it's not the voluntary or the labeling; it's how prescriptive, and even their own procurement programs are now saying now have to follow this new definition. So it's all about: is it going to lead to segregation and discrimination against imported cattle, which was what we went to the WTO with the M-Cool case about.
Now, some, though, would argue that's the whole point. I hope that it's restrictive to cattle coming from Mexico and from Canada, which then is a very circular discussion that leads us back to sort of where the WTO challenge was.
Yeah, there's. I think the majority of producers in the U.S. actually think bigger than that. Exports are really important to them. The integrated North American. There's some that are more want to obstruct trade, but really there's been such beneficial movement, and it's not just feed, it's feeder cattle, it's slaughter cattle. When we're dealing with climate change and some of the droughts, cattle have moved from there. So we have a place for them to move instead of leaving the herd, for one thing, or, we're able to maintain a higher feeding capacity in areas that are, we're probably going to experience that in Western Canada, where we're going to have to import more feeder cattle from the United States for a number of years. And that's actually going to benefit cow-calf producers in the U.S. because you're going to have a very active bidder on their market. So I think when people look at it more objectively, there's more benefits from an integrated market than there are ever losses in it.
I think one of the things that sometimes goes unmentioned is that integration is throughout the chain. Like, it's not like it's like, okay, well, we really are only integrated at this one point in the system. Whether it's feeder cattle, it's culled cows, or it's stockers going both directions, or it's finished cattle, or it's beef that's in a box. Canada's a substantial buyer of U.S. box beef. So, like, the integration is very, very, it's throughout the chain. And I think that's something that some people miss sometimes.
It even starts genetically. There's cattle moving back and forth. I mean, I know people who were down at the Denver Stock Show with a truckload of cattle, and once you get into cow-calf, there are people that own operations on both sides of the border. You're seeing Dr. Kijim being inducted into their cattle feeding Hall of Fame. Again, recognizing, and this integration dates back, almost a century in some cases. And we're seeing Eastern Canada now importing more and more feeder cattle from areas like Virginia. So it just stretches in a way that makes North America more competitive. And we have a great opportunity in Asia. They want grain-fed, high-quality beef, and we're the best in the world at doing that.
Speaking of Asia, any updates on? It's kind of been very quiet. China. I was talking to Don Close from Terrain earlier, and we were talking about how the U.S. has had some volatile struggles when it comes to exports of beef into China. What's our status from a Canadian perspective at this point?
There's really no change. We just, you hear that, there's no reason they're closed. Certainly, they lifted the COVID restrictions, but didn't lift the suspension that they had, which never should have been there in the first place. With an atypical case of BSE, your investigation ceases the minute you determine it's atypical. Well, we'll just change their rules so you don't even need to report it till your annual reporting. So, it really, until they just get the political will to move, it just seems it's stuck where it is right now. And, that could change any day, but it might not for a long time, too.
You mentioned Kijim. He's being inducted into the U.S. Cattle Feeding Hall of Fame. And there's going to be a reception tonight that I'm going to attend as well. That's being put on to recognize that achievement. As a Canadian who has fed a substantial amount of cattle in Canada, big obviously a large player in the U.S. as well. This is a very significant award. Like I think it's something that really needs to be people need to think about and recognize the fact that a Canadian is going to be inducted into the U.S. Cattle Feeding Hall of Fame. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just his remarkable career, how significant feedlot animal health became, not just in Canada and the U.S., but around the world. And, of course, he's become one of the most significant cattle feeders in the world. So, I've always said as Canadians, we can be as good or better than anybody in the world. And, he's clearly a great example of that.
I'm going to tell him that tonight at the reception, but I remember he would frequently send me emails when I would write something, and I would, whether he agreed or disagreed, I was just like, Jim's emailing me. He's actually reading what I'm saying. So he's one of the smartest guys in this business. There's just no question about it. Dennis, thanks so much for joining us here. All the best to you at NCBA, or CattleCon 2024 as they call it, and thanks so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and it should be a great week down here.